What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe, your host and producer of the Dr. Vibe Show. We're saying you're blessed and highly favored, you're a magnet for miracles, and you're a solution for someone's problem. We are fired up, jacked as always, to have another special friend on the show tonight. A little bit about myself. I'm host and producer of the Dr. Vibe Show. I'm also producer and co-host of the Good Men Project Show, which is once a month at the Good Men Project, one of the most viewed sites in the world for men. And I also do weekly contributions also every Tuesday afternoon at 2:30 p.m. I have something new up from the Dr. Vibe Show. Tonight, we have a very special lady on our show, Kenrya Rankin Naasel. And she has written a wonderful article that a lot of people have been talking about, and I talk about this, share about this article tonight. It's called I Don't Know Janay Rice's Whole Story, but I Understand. So here's a little bit about Kenrya. She is an award-winning author and editorial consultant whose insight has been tapped by leading outlets including the New York Times, Huffington Post, and Think Progress. She's published 3 books. She's 3 ahead of me. Most recently, Bet on Black African American Women Celebrate Fatherhood in the Age of Barack Obama. She's contributed to a number of publications, including Reader's Digest, Ebony, Glamour, and Redbook, and it's been translated in 21 languages. Wow. How do you get time to just sit on this show? This is 21. Oh, my, at least it's English. Kenrya is a founder and editorial director of the parenting site Black and Green Mama, and currently serves as contributing editor for Latina and Shop Smart magazines and a writer for Fast Company. Wow, she's an editorial associate at Reader's Digest, lifestyle editor at Latina, and DC editor. Have previously served as editorial associate at Reader's Digest. Oh, there's too much. I'm going to stop.
There's too much. It's fine.
It's all right. Well, welcome to the Dr. Vibe Show, Kenrya.
Thank you for having me.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm glad to be here.
Great. And how's your day going?
Pretty well. Got a lot of stuff done. To me, that's the measure of a good day.
Excellent. This is great. Well, we have a little bit of time for you to share with us tonight. So if you could, can you share a little bit more background about yourself with our audience?
Sure. So, as you said, I am a writer. Always have been. Worked on the staff of several magazines when I lived in New York. I went to undergrad at Howard University in Washington, D.C. and studied journalism. Moved to New York to work in magazines and ended up getting my master's in publishing at NYU. And magazines and, of course, now web, writing is pretty much all I've ever wanted to do. So it's pretty cool that I get to work in the space that I'm interested in. And, one of the things that I'm most passionate about these days, I do a lot of work in the parenting space and, of course, just advocating for Black women and Black families, which is really how this article came about.
Excellent. Just a little bit more about your background. Where did the passion for writing come from?
Oh, it's just always kind of been there, and it's interesting because I think I've been doing it for so long that it's hard to pinpoint. I was moving a couple of years ago and came across a box that was full of all of these things that I had been holding on to for who knows how long. And in that box, I found a notebook, and it was full of all these stories that I wrote when I was in the 6th grade. So what's that, like 12? And it was cover to cover, and then on the cover, and then on the back, full of stories that I wrote. And, so at least since back then, it's just always been a part of me. I've always been a huge reader. I started reading at 4 and just kind of never stopped. And so I think those two things kind of go hand in hand. Reading was always kind of my constant comfort, and I guess I wanted to be a part of that world.
What was your experience going to Howard University? Because you and I have something in common indirectly, because my father is a graduate of Howard University.
HU, yes. It was amazing. It was interesting because I had never specifically saw myself as going to an HBCU, a historically Black college or university. It was just, I was looking for universities that had great journalism programs, and it was one of the schools that I applied to, and they actually courted me pretty heavily. And then when I went to visit, I felt like I was at home the minute I stepped on campus. And the next 4 years just kind of proved that. And I live in the DC area now, so I find myself on campus quite often. So the Howard, relationship kind of never ends. Like once you've gone to Howard, you're always a part of that family in a very real way. So I work with girls on campus in a leadership program. To this day, I find myself there a lot, and it's like home to me.
Excellent. Well, I'm happy to see that you're giving back, and I just can tell by your heart and your soul that that's part of your core nature. So let's start talking about this article. What inspired you to write it?
Well, I was on a morning show, national morning show on TV One. It's called News One Now with Roland Martin, and we were talking about the NFL's new domestic violence policy, just kind of in general terms, and specifically talking about Ray Rice's situation. But this was before the elevator video was released, and in the course of the conversation, I not necessarily just caught up in the moment, but just really feeling for, victims who I find are very often blamed in these situations. And, I talked very briefly about an incident that happened when I was in college and I dated a guy who, ended up being abusive. And in the course of talking about that, I was on a panel with a man who worked as an editor at The Root, David Swartlick. And after that show, once the elevator tape came out, he reached out to me and asked if I would be willing to share my story with his readers.
Okay, it looks like we've lost Kenrya for a moment, but we'll just stay on live because I'm sure she'll come back into the conversation. So just bear with us for a few moments, folks. She should be back in just a moment, having some technical difficulties. So bear with us for just a moment. Okay, so it's Dr. Vibe here. We're just in standby mode for a few moments. Kenrya is there. It looks like she's coming back. She's experiencing some technical challenges on her end, but we're going to stay until she comes back on. Well, we'll be here anyways, but we're just waiting for her to come back on the conversation. So just hold tight. Thank you. Okay, are you back there? Can you hear us?
I, I can. I'm back. Oh my goodness.
It's all right, no problem. We're just staying steady, no problem. So as we continue, you were saying about what got you writing this piece. I think you were saying you were on a panel in on Roland Martin's show.
I was. I spoke up about, I shared my story of having dealt with a man who ended up being abusive for the first time publicly, actually. And in the course of that conversation, once the elevator tape hit a few days later, the editor from The Root, who I was on the panel with, reached out and asked if I'd be willing to share my story as a way to help people, help readers put a more personal face.
Okay, so we have lost her again. So we're just going to stay patient here. So it's Dr. Vibe here, your host and producer of the Dr. Vibe Show. Again, Kenrya is having some technical issues on her end, so we're just going to stay on until she comes back on the show. As always, you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles and you're a solution for someone's problem. Some upcoming shows in the very near future on the Dr. Vibe Show. We have one coming up at the end of this month, last Thursday of this month, just to give you a sneak little peek of what's coming up. We're having a Black Men Roundtable about Black men and social media, which is going to be very good and very interesting. I'd just like to take some time to thank everyone who supports the show, whether watching the video end or listening to a podcast. It's appreciated and not taken for granted. So we're just going to wait another few moments to see if Kenrya can resolve the technical issues on her end. So hold tight. Thank you.
Hi,
Okay, are you back with us?
I am.
All right, that's great. We're staying strong. No problem.
Okay.
Do you remember where you left off?
I don't know what all you heard.
Well, I basically, I think when you said it was the first time you ever shared that story
It
about
was publicly, yes.
being in an abusive relationship. So if
Hmm.
you could just continue from there. I guess my first conversation piece was what made you at that time share that story for the first time?
I was angry.
Okay, no, it's honest.
I was on, one of the people who was on the panel was victim blaming, which is a term that we hear very often, and when it comes to both survivors of sexual abuse as well as domestic violence, in which rather than asking the question, why did he hit her, you ask the question, what did she do to get hit? Um, and he, kept saying, we women provoke this, they bring this on themselves, they ask for it. And in my anger, I just was like, look, I can unequivocally say that I never asked for someone, to try to strangle me. I wasn't belligerent. All these things that we want to make, use to make it the victim's fault. The bottom line is it doesn't matter what I did, even if I did nothing. The fact of the matter is, the question that we should be asking is, why did this man feel that it was okay to hurt this woman? And, in my response to him, I, decided that it was time for me to share what I had gone through in college.
And I don't want to spend too much time on that incident, but how long did you stay in that relationship and what was keeping you in that
Mhm.
relationship?
It wasn't very long. It was literally, well, we were together off and on for a couple of years, but it's interesting because it was a progression that I think is very common and we don't, necessarily hear about it, but it started with a man who was emotionally manipulative, who found little ways to make me, feel less than, who, found little things to do to make me feel not quite as confident in myself as I would normally be. And those are ways of making it easier for me to accept behavior that is less than what it should be. And so it started there, and just over time, I guess as he got more comfortable, it got worse. But the actual violence, we only had two violent incidences, and they were probably over the course of maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And when the last thing happened, which was literally him trying to strangle me, um, it was interesting because in the moment I was just trying to get away. And one of the things I talk about in the essay is that I was lucky that my safety and my resources were not tied to this man. We didn't live together. We weren't married. I didn't have to worry about him, cutting me off financially. It was more putting some distance between myself, and him. And so I did that immediately as soon as I was able to get away, which was an ordeal in itself. But then he came to my room the next day and he apologized and he cried. And, there's this whole cycle of that, also plays into that mental manipulation. It's, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. And for literally 48 hours, I said, okay. I said, he didn't mean it. All the things that he said, I loved him. And so I said, okay. And I was literally sitting in my room by myself doing homework or something. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, I literally said that to myself. What am I doing? And that was like it came out of nowhere. It was like a tap on my shoulder. That was my wake up moment that said, you can't do this. This is not going to end well for you. And so I just decided I was done. And that was it. And it took, he did not, obviously, being the person that he was, didn't necessarily take that well. And there were, for weeks, I had to step past him because he would camp out outside my door. He would be, yeah. So I can't hear you, but I'm glad you can hear me. But
no, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Yeah, no, just wow. And again, I appreciate it, and I don't take it for granted that you're sharing this, because this is probably the second time you ever shared it publicly.
Yes.
And probably I'm giving you the space to share whatever you want about this. Was this a situation, like, how long did your family know about this?
No. And
go ahead.
I think that there's, part of, there was this whole Twitter campaign that kind of started the day that Janay Rice, posted the Instagram message saying that she loved her husband and was staying, and they were example of love and all of this. And the hashtag was why I stayed. And I think, part of why one of the reasons that some women, have a hard time getting out is there's a shame cycle that kicks in. You have this image of who you are and who you want to be, and that doesn't include someone who is being abused. And there's also an element of not wanting to involve other people for their own safety. For me, I didn't tell my friends and my family for those two reasons. One, I was embarrassed. I didn't want anybody to know what was going on. And so it wasn't until well after it was over and I had finally gotten him to leave me alone that I even shared with my closest friends what had been happening. I mean, and there were some people who kind of had an inkling, but nobody flat out had heard the stories of what had happened. And I waited even longer to tell my dad, who I'm very close to, because we don't need another black man in prison. And my dad would have come from Cleveland to Washington, D.C.,
yes.
And it would have been a problem.
Yeah. And we won't say what type of involvement your dad would have been, right?
It would have been all bad for dude.
Yeah. So, it would not be pretty, right?
No, not in the least. And so, it was protection of my ego, and it was protection of the people who I loved that led me to keep it to myself for quite a while until I was comfortable and had lived in it enough to feel comfortable and confident enough in who I was to be able to share it, and strong enough to keep them from jumping into it.
Wow. With the Janay Rice situation, what are your thoughts? Let's actually go to the top. What do you think about this whole situation? Then focus on, your title says it all, what you think, but what do you feel? What are your thoughts towards Ray Rice? What are your thoughts towards Janay Rice?
Well, my heart goes out to her. I have had but a small taste of even if the only thing that has ever happened between them is what happened that night that we saw on that tape, I feel for her, and I know how difficult it can be even after, what I consider, I feel like my incident paled in comparison to what she went through that night. And I can only imagine how difficult it is to try to get out of the situation if that is what she wants, because again, I don't know her whole situation. But when your fate is tied to a man, when you have had a child with someone, that is a bond that can be difficult to break. I have dealt with, the whole, you don't want to break up your family, you don't, want to do anything that you feel is jeopardizing the life that you have built for yourself. And I just pray for her safety. I really do. With regards to him, I feel the same way about him that I feel about any man that hits a woman. I can't. Like, there's nothing to me. I don't care what she said. I don't care what she said about your mama. I don't care if she spit on you. There's nothing to me that justifies putting your hands on a woman. And he treated her so. It was heartbreaking. He treated her in the way that some people would not treat a dog. You wouldn't. There are people who would blanch at the thought of pushing or kicking a woman and with his foot to get her out of the way. It was just unconscionable.
True.
Mm.
Uh, what do you feel about how the NFL has handled this situation? Like,
I think that Goodell said it himself when he said that he handled it poorly from the very beginning. How I don't understand how somebody gets 2 game suspension when you have, I remember you told me that one of your first shows was about, Michael Vick's situation. You have someone who is, tangentially connected to dog fighting who pretty much loses everything and goes to jail.
yeah,
And you have someone who brutalizes a woman and gets suspended for 2 games. It is just amazing to me the value that is not placed on the lives of women and specifically of black women. And whether or not, when the Ravens decided to release Ray Rice and then, the league decided to ban him basically, they say, oh, well, we hadn't seen the tape. But you knew what happened. It took you having to see the actual punch in order to, make the determination when all the evidence had already told you what had happened in the elevator. And then, of course, there are the reports that say that they did actually see the tape and chose to worry more about the optics of the NFL and, than about the actual safety of this woman. Doesn't speak highly for the National Football League at all.
do you feel that Mr. Rice should be given another opportunity to play in the National Football League again?
I That's a difficult question. I mean, it is difficult. It's hard to say that it's okay to take someone's livelihood away from them, but did they take it or did he give it? You know what I mean? Like, there have to be some consequences to the things that you do and the things that and it wasn't even something that he did in the dark. He did it in public. Like, at what point are we going to force people to accept the consequences of the things that they do? And, it's not for me to judge him. I honestly, I don't know. I don't want to ever not let a man, a black man, anybody be able to make a living and do what they do. But it had to be something more than being suspended for 2 games and a standing ovation when they show your face on the screen during training camp.
Mm, good point. In your conversations that you've had about either this incident or this subject recently,
Hmm.
how are the conversations you're having with women different than what you're having with men?
No, thankfully, not with any who I know.
Right.
It's interesting because my friends and I have spent quite a bit of time talking about this, and we were just talking about it over the weekend. And so many of them have shared, both via social networks and then face to face, that they've been having men pop up on their timeline who are very supportive of Ray Rice. I mean, there are T-shirts. There's like a whole hashtag and a movement of people who say that they stand with Ray Rice. And so they have unfriended quite a few men from from their social network circles who basically are like, she had it coming. I have not had any personal interactions with any of those men, except actually today on one of my Facebook pages, a man who I guess read the Root article posted basically saying that I didn't blame the victim enough and that, she had brought it on and that I was wrong because I didn't, talk about her fault and what it was that she did to deserve that. I chose to ignore him because I don't engage with fools, but that's been the only person who has, on a one-to-one said anything to me about with a dissenting viewpoint other than that fool on the TV show that I was on that provoked me to even share in the first place.
Sure. Absolutely. I want to share the rest of the time that we're having this conversation talking about the whole aspect of domestic violence. And it was already an issue, but my concern is if this didn't happen, would it still be a serious issue? Now, and again, hopefully we'll continue this conversation, not just you and I, but many of us down the road. But what are your thoughts on the attitude towards domestic violence in our society today?
You know, I think that this conversation has very, clearly illustrated that there are two sides to this. There are, people who, particularly women, of course, who feel that there is never a reason to hit for a man to hit a woman. And I know that there are lots of men who feel that way, but then you have the folks who really do think that it is justified. I don't know what this does to the conversation. So often things happen and they loom large and then we move on and we forget about them. I mean, remember, just a few months ago we were talking about saving our girls and kind of what happened to that. We cycled through. I remember when you and I were talking about doing this show and I mentioned that I was sick last week, and I honestly thought that we would be out of the news cycle to even be able to discuss it this week, because so often, things just, they flood into the national consciousness and then there's something else that's sexier that we move on to. Already today we've moved on to talk about the actress in LA who was detained and handcuffed allegedly because she was suspected of being a prostitute or kissing her husband and making out with her husband or whatever on the street. We always find a new thing to talk about. And so I don't know what this does to the discussion, nationally and internationally. I hope that at the very least it helps women who have gone through this to feel less isolated, because there's so much of it is the isolation. When I was talking about how I didn't tell anybody, and that was probably some of the worst part of it, was that I didn't feel that I could share what I was going through with anybody and that I was suffering through it on my own. And so, my hope is that one, it helps people to know that they're not alone and to feel more comfortable sharing, which is what it did for me. And that it also encourages folks to get help, both, the victims and the folks who are out here, putting their hands on these women, that it opens up the conversation enough that people realize I'm not alone and there's something that I can do about it.
Great. In regards to the writing of this article, how long did it take you to write? And I'm getting a feeling here, to start it may have been the most challenging part, because there's a lot of emotion that was built up in you. Was the start the hardest part of writing this article?
It was. Actually, saying yes was the hardest part, because honestly I looked at the email for about an hour and tried to respond to it for about an hour before I was finally able to put together the words to say yes, and to figure out, to give myself the courage to give details and to be able to speak about it, because I hadn't done so. And it's interesting because I write about everything. Like, there are things that my dad won't tell me to this day because he's afraid it's going to end up in a book or on somebody's website. So, it's hard to be close to a writer and have secrets. And I try very hard to only tell my story, which is why, I didn't share names or identifying details, because that's not my story. That's his story. Right. But to figure out how to tell the story and what I was comfortable sharing, and to give myself the permission to be able to do it, that was definitely the difficult part, to say yes. Yes. And it took about maybe 2 hours.
That's
it? I write literally, I write something that is published at least 5 days a week, at least.
Congratulations.
That's how I make money. So.
No, and yes, it's how you make money, but that's a gift, right? That's the way I look at it, and that you're being rewarded for your gift. You first know what your gift is, and then you're making it work for you.
It is the biggest, well, it's the second biggest blessing. My daughter is the biggest blessing. But it is the second biggest blessing that I'm able to make a living at writing, which is what I love to do, and that I'm able to have the flexibility to do it in the way that I want to do it. I work for myself. I work from my home, so I'm able to be with my child all day, every day, and also able to pay my bills and keep a roof over my head. It is the second biggest blessing. Yeah.
Right on. With this subject of domestic violence, obviously there are concerns about manhood
Hmm.
these days. I'd like you to share what your concerns are about manhood, because obviously manhood isn't right if a number of men are doing it. What are your thoughts on manhood in today's society?
Well, I mean, I don't tie those two things together, and that comes from my experience. My latest book, Fed on Black African American Women Celebrate Fatherhood in the Age of Barack Obama, specifically looks at Black men who, in part, define their manhood as being nurturing fathers and being men who are great with their communities and in the global village, as opposed, and not just in their homes. And so, to me, that is manhood. So the idea that having physical power over a woman is equated with being a man is just rubbish to me. It's not what I've experienced, and it's not to me what does that. So, am I concerned about the idea that there are some people who think that? I mean, they have always been, as long as there has been time, people who have relished having power over others and use that to define themselves. But I refuse to jump on the bandwagon of agreeing that that is equated with manhood.
What impact do you feel the media has, positively or negatively, when it comes to domestic violence against women?
Hmm. It's interesting. I think, and when I think of media, as someone who works in media, I also think of just all the things that we consume, right? So the movies we watch, the TV shows that we see, the villains that we root for, and a lot of I, one of the biggest problems I see is that we've been desensitized to violence in general. We see it all the time. People get shot, people beat each other up, people, we root for cats like, Walt on Breaking Bad who killed folks and dissolves them in acid. Like we see these things and we eventually stop thinking of them as being real and start thinking of them as entertainment. Shows like Law and Order, SVU, and it so much of that it just kind of feeds us a steady diet of it to the point where it's hard for us to even bat an eye when it's happening in real life because it has so much entertainment value for us at this point. I think the media does a bang up job of perpetuating the idea that violence is okay and normalizing it. But on the other hand, we have outlets that, like you and like The Root, who, take the time to delve into the stories and try to make these things more personal in hopes of combating that other side of it where it's normalized and putting a human face on it and helping folks to see that, this isn't just somebody over there or some actress on this TV show, but this is something that's happened to, somebody's mother and somebody's sister, and, helping us to really understand that it's real. It's not entertainment.
You've made my day. Someone put me in the same sentence as The Root. You have made my day.
I'm glad to do it.
That's good stuff. As a mother of a daughter, how has this incident affected you, made you reflect even deeper beyond what you've written and what you've experienced? How has it affected you in your soul?
That's a great question. As a mother of a daughter, I mean, so much of what I do is about teaching her not even teaching her, showing her, teaching by example. Um, you know, my hope for one is that one day she'll be interested enough to read the things that I've written when I collect them for her, and she'll be able to learn from that she'll see from the life that I've lived that, it's okay to be a strong woman and that you don't have to kowtow and you don't have to, be embarrassed at the choices that other people make, that you can own your own choices and own your own destiny. And I want for her to feel, although my dad did a bang up job in raising me, I don't want her to, one, ever have to go through what I went through, but also to ever feel some sense of embarrassment over something that somebody else chose to impose on her. Um, you know, so much of it is about giving her the tools to be able to handle the tough situations. You know, it's why we don't spoon feed our children things, right? We try to give them skills so that when they go out in the world, they can do them on their own. And I just hope that I can put those tools in her toolbox so that there is no embarrassment, there is no fear, there is only self-preservation and knowing that she's loved and can, you know, rely on the people who are there for her to help her get out of a bad situation.
Excellent. With the Black community, what is your thoughts on how they're responding to this Janay Rice incident? What are your thoughts on how they're responding?
I mean, I think it's been the same as, you know, everybody else. It's, you know, I have personally in the interactions that I've had with, you know, people in my network, both in real time and or in real life and online, have really seen folks, you know, coming to the defense of women who have been in a situation. There's also been a lot of, you know, let that dude that tried that with my sister kind of a thing, which feels good. It's protective, you know, and it's a good instinct. We need to protect ourselves. And I think a lot of times, you know, Black women, we don't necessarily always feel that we are protected in that way by our own men. And so it's been good to see that outpouring in the wake of this. I mean, of course, it's terrible that it comes from this, but it is good to see that we are supported in that way.
Great, great. You've mentioned your father a number of times.
He's awesome.
No, well, hey, he's the man, right? He is the man. Has he had any discussion, or you had any discussion about the Ray Rice incident and domestic violence with him? Has he given any thought process to it at all?
He actually called me when he read the article. He called, and you know, at first I was concerned because my dad has a way of forgetting things, so I thought he was gonna like be upset anew, like, you didn't tell. I'm like, yeah, I did tell you, but no, that didn't happen. He was like, I read your article. Like angry, ready to come here for something that happened a decade ago.
Right.
But he remembered, and you know, he was just like, you know, he called and he was just like, I'm really, you know, proud of you for sharing that. I know that was hard. And you know, he was just glad that I was able to share it. And he's, you know, like every other man, he's upset about it. And he also doesn't like the Ravens, so it doesn't help. You know, they used to be the Cleveland Browns, and I'm from Cleveland. We don't mess with the Ravens. So yeah, that doesn't help. He was upset, you know, about the entire situation. My dad being who he is, he actually could not bring himself to watch the video, so he just read about it.
Right.
And he was upset.
Another conversation piece about your awesome dad, and I hope he sees this conversation and he has a big smile on his face eventually after he watches, because I know he always has a smile when he's speaking and thinking about you. What qualities makes your dad awesome?
He is patient. He is loving. He has always been I've called him and I write about him as such. He's always been a natural father. You know, he slipped into the role like he was built for it, made for it, born for it. You know, my story is that my mother wasn't really there for me as a child. And wow. Yeah, and so I was raised by my dad.
That's rare. That's not say it's rare, but it's not the common story you hear about blacks who have been raised by one parent. Let me put it there.
Absolutely, yeah. I was the only person I knew who, growing up, who was, you know, besides my sister, who was being raised by a man. And so, yeah, you know, when my parents went their separate ways, when they divorced, my dad fought for custody.
Wow.
So
fantastic.
So he's been integral. I feel like my life would have been a different life had I not grown up with him every day. And it was difficult, you know. When I was a kid, I lamented not being able to do everything that my friends did and not having everything that my friends had. And my dad would say, look, we're on a single income. We don't have the same luxuries that your friends who both parents are together, but I'm doing the best that I can. And he gave me everything, you know, that he could. And he taught me, you know, beyond giving me everything, he taught me that I deserved everything. And that propelled me to be able to, you know, go to school and get it paid for and start a career. And he gave me the freedom to be able to pursue, something that, people tend to think of as of the artist life of being a writer as being not necessarily a great way to support yourself. And, you have some parents who push their kids to do more practical things. And that was never my dad. It was always, what do you love? Okay, now do that.
Wow,
Mm.
outstanding. That, well, I have relatives in Cleveland, so if I go down to Cleveland, I'd love to get permission to meet him and just sit down and
Absolutely.
just let him share me. It sounds like I got to interview him now. That's another interview I got to book now. I got to get him on the show.
He would never do it.
Oh, come on. Never do it?
He is so, he's a very humble guy. He's
Yeah.
just kind of chill. He hangs out. He watches when I do stuff. He thinks it's cool, but he does not want to be in front of anyone's camera.
No, I'd bring just a portable recorder and just have him share. I wouldn't put him in front of a camera. No, no.
Okay, well then maybe.
Maybe. Well, okay, you're gonna work that out. You're my you're my agent on that one.
I got you.
You're my PR director on getting your dad on the show. That'd be great.
Okay.
Domestic violence is always a continuing problem. When here's an area we may not hear is there a lot of domestic violence against young girls? Now I know it's prevalent, but how serious of an issue is this? Because again, where I get concerned here is this incident happened, and as you said, the way that the news cycle or the media cycle goes, it's going to drift away and it's not an issue.
Yeah.
What are our young girls telling you about this issue?
I can't say that I've spoken with any young girls lately, but what I do know is that, 43% of women who are in college have dealt with some type of abuse from a man on campus, whether it was physical or it was emotional. And that's nearly half. And yeah, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that something like, that age group, I think it's 16 to 24 for women, is the age group that experiences the most instances of violence from intimate partners. I mean, it is a young woman's epidemic, and we don't tend to hear about it for some of those same reasons. There's a shame. There's all these things that go, and then there's also a lot of women have said that they didn't necessarily realize that it was abuse. They're still young. They're early on in their dating careers. They don't necessarily realize. Go ahead.
Kenny, I want to interrupt you right there. They don't realize it's abuse. That gets me concerned on what's being taught in families.
How many people are actually having conversations with their children about what constitutes a healthy relationship? I think a lot of what we learn about relationships are what we observe in our families. So much of what I try to show to my daughter is, like I said, about doing, and showing her, because that's what we pick up on. We learn, through our interactions with the adults who we trust. And, who knows what it is that folks are observing, but I just don't know that folks are necessarily having conversations with their sons and their daughters about how they should be treating each other and how they should be treated in relationships. Not until it becomes a problem.
And that I think is a great core point you hit up there about our young people, but teaching each other, whatever age, we should always be learning how to make better relationships.
Absolutely.
It's so core, and we just see, unfortunately, that it's not being done enough, because look at the result. Look at how many divorces there are. Look at how many domestic abuse cycles there are. Do we need to start this at a young age? And what are you at this time? If I know your daughter's still young, but are there any things that you're trying to instill in your daughter about the importance of relationships and respect and how to treat people?
So yes, and so she's 3. So at her age, it's still it's manners, and it's treating folks the way you want them to treat you, talking to folks like you have some sense and that kind of thing, and deferring to adults. We're really still in that phase, but it's also about, we talk about things that, are appropriate and inappropriate when it comes to relating with adults and those kind of things too. So we're really still in that phase. What's okay for people to touch you? How do you relate with doctors? What adults is it safe to speak with? Whatever. But I think that we have those conversations with our children when they're young, and then there's usually this whole long stretch where we're not having the talks. You know what I mean, with our kids
Right.
until they hit puberty, and then okay, we might sit down and have a birds and bees conversation with them. But to your point about what are we teaching our kids, maybe these are conversations that we need to be having with them during that stage, because kids are getting sex ed. And I mean, I had a sex ed class in the 5th grade. So when we're talking about that, we also need to be talking about how to build strong relationships and how to take care of ourselves.
Excellent. Well, as we wind down our conversation piece, because I know in a few minutes you have to get back to your pride and joy.
I do.
Because I heard her in the background a little bit earlier saying, "Okay, gotta wind, watch the time count, watch the time count." Um,
She came in, yes.
yes, I heard her. I said, "Uh-oh, I know whose house it really is."
That's right.
Right. Um, Here's a question that I'm going to ask, have you answered for different groups. So first off, when it comes to domestic violence, what is your message to men when it comes to domestic violence against women?
My message to men is that there's never a reason. You are always in control of yourself and your actions. Walk away. I don't care what she said. I don't care what she did. I don't care how upset you are. Even if you only think of it in terms of self-preservation, walk away.
Okay. To society about domestic violence, and I mean those who have not been involved, whether they were the aggressor or the person who experienced the domestic violence. Outside of that group, what is your message to that group of individuals who, just society in general?
This is serious, and these are people's lives, and these are people's families. And for one, part of what has been so difficult for me is that this has kind of played out like entertainment. Um, and it's not that. We need to stop gawking and start doing what we can. Do you recognize the signs of abuse? Do you have people in your life who you think are going through a tough time? Take the time to reach out to them and help them, to identify the resources and let them know that they're not alone, so that they can get out of these situations. We need to take this seriously. These are people's lives.
What's your message to the NFL?
My message to the NFL is that you have got to value the lives of women more than you value the lives of dogs.
Wow. That's a tweetable, folks.
I mean, really and truly, this, if nothing, that disparity has been mind blowing to me. And they need to be consistent. Website, what is it? 528. They did an analysis of the crimes that have been committed in the NFL and found that domestic incidents, violence incidents, make up 48% of the crimes that are being committed by men, the violent crimes that are being committed by men in the NFL. So half the time that they're involved in hitting somebody, it's a woman. It's their partner. That can't stand. And I do applaud them for creating a more comprehensive domestic violence policy. And one of the things I actually wrote about in that essay is that, Goodall has said that he is going to put in place training, for all the men who are coming through the pipeline to the NFL, which includes literally almost 2 million boys, every year who are playing, at the youth level, who are playing football at college and in high school, and giving them the tools in order to help them to build strong relationships and to, deter them from having violent ones. And I think that that's excellent, and it'll be even more excellent if it's actually implemented and implemented, with an eye to actually, saving the women that they're going to interact with and helping them to have, better lives and better interactions, as opposed to just thinking about the PR of the whole thing. So I hope and I pray that that actually happens, because while of course this isn't something that is unique to sports, this is what we're talking about right now, and it is, the proportions, the fact that it's 48% of the violent incidents that these men are getting into versus 21% of the general population in the United States is a problem.
That's a huge
Yeah,
issue.
what is it in that culture that allows that to happen?
And you wonder, and this is another conversation altogether because, again, NFL, violent sport, and aggressive actions are involved. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if this is an issue in the area of police.
Hmm.
Just a thought.
Mm-hmm.
Just a thought. Next group I want you to share a message with would be the media when it comes to domestic violence.
I mean, I will say that I think that this news cycle has been great. That folks have been asking the right questions for the most part. There have been some really smart pieces written, and some really great things on TV where we've examined not the victim blaming of it all, but or well, what we have in the context of pointing the finger at folks who are doing this and letting them know shame on you, for asking these women, how they got themselves in these situations and how they could possibly not get themselves out of them. I would just say that needs to be the story. It can't be using this for entertainment. It can't be, us picking apart. It's the same thing that happens when women are assaulted. What was she wearing? How drunk was she? Like we can't have those kind of conversations going on because they don't add to things, and all they do is give the folks, the victim blamers, some legitimacy, and let them feel like they can stand up and stop their nonsense. And
Okay.
all that does is, perpetuate the cycle that puts these women in these situations that they can't get out of.
Two last quick conversation pieces. Quick yes or no. Should Roger Goodell be gone? Yes or no?
I can't answer that.
All right.
I think it's bigger than him. He's the commissioner, but there's obviously a culture there. Yes, you said yes or no. My answer is I don't know.
Okay. No, no problem. That's all right because it's your show. I'm just steering the ship. And finally, what is your message to other women like yourself who've experienced and or are going through domestic violence at this time?
Yeah. You are not alone, and I know that it can feel helpless and you can feel hopeless, but there are people who make their livings to help folks who are in tight spots, and you are not alone. And there are helplines, and I wanted to give a helpline number, and we can add that. But yes, I mean you're not alone.
Excellent. Well, Kenrya, thank you so much for your steadfastness. It took us a little bit time to get this off, but it's a done
Mm.
deal. Um, First things first, thanks again for taking your time, and thanks for your daughter to letting you have the time to come on the show tonight. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they best connect with you?
All my contact information is on my website. It's kenrya.com, so it's KENRYA.com.
Excellent. And a wonderful surprise. We'll let out of the bag in the next few weeks. Kenrya will be back on our show again, talking about her outstanding book that I knew about a long time ago and said, how am I going to get a hold of this lady? But it's finally happened, and she's going to be sharing with us the wonderful book in the next few weeks. So we're looking forward to another conversation. And I'll put it out there, Kenrya, anytime you want to come on the show, the video camera and the mic is always open for you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on.
No problem. It's Dr. Vibe, your host and producer of the Dr. Vibe Show. Also, I'm the host and co-producer of the Good Men Project show, which is on once a month on the Good Men Project, one of the most viewed sites in the world for men. Also, you can catch a new episode of the Dr. Vibe Show every Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern on the Good Men Project. Also, selective shows and other places in the Good Men Project. I'm contributing more and more there. And also, you can catch selected shows posted on the Facebook fan page of the Black Life Coaches Network, the #1 Black Life Coaches Network in the world. On their Facebook page, you can check me out. As always, we can say you're blessed and highly favored, you're a magnet for miracles, and you're a solution for someone's problem. God bless, peace be well, and keep the faith. And thanks for everyone who put up with all the technical issues tonight. We appreciate it. Bye-bye.